Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our Institute Fellows Roundtable. My name is Nicole Cromarty, and I'm the Director of Learning and Engagement here at the Clyfford Still Museum. Tonight, we're going to get a special glimpse at where the Clyfford Still Museum is headed in the years to come. When our director, Joyce Tsai, joined the museum 3 years ago, she came with a big vision. She believed that this museum could be a space for artists and thought leaders, the freedom to innovate. Since then, the Institute has taken the form of 3 pillars of study: art, early childhood education, and social enterprise. This summer, we're so grateful to have hosted these 5 wonderful fellows who have been in residence with us here for the last 3 weeks. The first fellows selected to participate in the Institute include Sarah Fox and Kevin Appel in studio art on the end. And then on the other end, Dr. Michael A. Barla and Dr. Heather Kaplan in early childhood education. And then right in the middle, we have Emily Grace King in social enterprise. It's been a total delight for our staff to have them all here, and our partners, some of which are in the audience tonight, to have them here and spend time with them, supporting their work. And with that, I should thank all of the staff here that have met with them, opened up our collections to them, and shared their work with them. Following this conversation with the fellows tonight, which will be moderated by Joyce, we'll take questions from the audience. We are so grateful to our community of thought partners who made this program possible. Thank you to our advisory committee members who helped select this cohort and give shape to this program. Will you please wave when I call your name? Many of you are here tonight. So for art, we have Harry Cooper, who's right here in the front. He's the Benny Mellon Curator of Modern Art at the National Gallery of Art. Bridget Cooks, who's Professor of African American Studies and Art History at UC Irvine. And Odili Odita, who's an artist, also in the front row. Our early childhood educators are hiding in the back. We have Christina Gillanders, who's an associate professor of early childhood education from the University of Colorado, Denver. And Sharon Schaefer, who's the founding director of the Smithsonian Early Enrichment Center. And in social enterprise, we have Erin Duke, who's a product leader based here in Denver. In the social enterprise pillar, we also had Claude Granitsky and Dan Wong, who also served, but were not able to join us this evening. All right, now I'm excited to introduce Joyce Tsai, our director, to moderate this conversation. Let's give her and our fellows a warm welcome, please.
All right, I'm so thrilled that you all are here on a rainy day to celebrate this really kind of new chapter at the museum. So I just want to begin by acknowledging that Clyfford Still is a recognized genius in American art, a leading force in abstract expressionism, and he cultivated that reputation for being a kind of loner. And for being fiercely independent, startlingly original. What I've learned here at the museum, looking at his art and archives, is that brilliant things, even what we call genius, are never forged alone. Still benefited from so many individuals who committed their networks, resources, time, and treasure to him because they found his work so compelling that they were moved to share it. Still's work drew strength from, and in fellowship, one of his most early formative experiences took place while he was junior faculty at the Washington State University in the 1930s. He was awarded a residency in upstate New York at Yaddo, and embedded in that vibrant community, Still pushed his art in new, startling directions that you can actually see in Gallery 2, upstairs. Over the course of his career, he would enjoy several other fellowships, nourished with other artists and intellectuals, given the gift of time, independence, and community. And he paid it forward. One of the first people I got to know when I became director at the Clifford Still Museum was Deborah Buck, who is an exceptional painter based in New York. Still mentored her and invested in her. He sent her to Skowhegan, her very first residency that set her on her artistic path. She too has paid it forward. This inaugural cohort of Institute Fellows was made possible through her generous contributions, as well as support from Metrics IQ, the company led by our board member, Rob McDaniels. The Institute takes seriously the fact that Still gave 93% of everything he made, as well as papers, to an unmanned American city when he died, not a museum or an art institution. This museum showcases his extraordinary work, but we also see the collections as a resource from which many disciplines, perspectives, individuals, communities can draw strength. We launched our first call for proposals this past spring, and this inaugural class reflects the areas of burgeoning expertise that our institution holds. The Institute is shaped by the dedicated thought leadership of Nicole Cromartie, our Director of Learning and Engagement, and Anna Boatwright, Deputy Director and COO, as well as the strategic prowess of Barbara Russell, who's not here tonight, Director of Development. We worked closely with our advisors and identified and interviewed a number of candidates from these fields who shared their plans to use CSM over the course of these 3 short weeks this summer. The roundtable tonight is the culmination of their time here in Denver, drawing deeply from our collections, archives, but also from the treasure that our staff represents and that of our community, our city, Denver. I'm delighted to introduce them to you all tonight. What I'm going to do is give brief intros of each of our fellows and invite them to share a quick overview of where they came from, what they've explored here at the Still. And after we meet everyone, we'll have a conversation about the impact of the fellowship on their work. And so I'm going to go ahead and start. I'm going to take a seat over here and start my introduction with Kevin Appel, who is an abstract painter based in Los Angeles, represented by Miles McHenry, with an international record of exhibition too long to share. It includes shows, for example, at the Institute of Contemporary Art, MoMA, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, as well as the Walker Art Center, amongst many, many, many others, several of which also hold his work in their permanent collections. He's a professor of art and currently serves as art department chair, the Claire Trevor School of Arts, University of California, Irvine. So I cede the floor.
Okay. I think I'm going to stand up so I can see you and you can see me. All right. Welcome, everybody. And I just wanted to take a second. These are short, but I wanted to take a second to thank Joyce for having us, for having the wherewithal, the idea to put this institute together. It's been an incredible experience being here. Also to the advisors who are here and the staff who has been incredibly welcoming and given us like unprecedented access to this material, which has been fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to keep this relatively short. I'm going to talk a little bit about my introduction to Still, a little bit about, a very small amount about why he interests me, because it's also vast and I don't have time. And then also a little bit about my work and what I did here. So starting with this picture, this is from 1976 at SF MoMA. So I was 9 years old at the time. I was living in Southern California. Took a trip to San Francisco with my parents and saw this show, which was kind of amazing then to come here and be able to find this in the archives, an actual photograph of the show that I went to. But it was impactful for me. I had been around abstraction. My parents were people who took me to museums and had a taste for modernism. But there was something about seeing this work in its sort of factual nature. There was something about it that was very frontal, that was felt like deep time to me, like something that had kind of always existed, as opposed to a kind of quick development, or something where you could trace all the marks out. I also didn't think of him now I'm not saying I thought all this at 9 years old. I'm saying that something felt important at the time that I then parsed out over my many, many years. But, and then something that felt ethical, right? And something that, in its directness, I guess. And then I also, subsequently didn't really think of him as a kind of gestural painter in the sort of pride of gesture sense, right? But that there was something more about the way he laid down work, especially in this period, that was more kind of like a bricklayer's labor or something like that. And there was this kind of exhaustion and intention and repetitive mark that wasn't really about the flourish of virtuosity, right? In the same way that I saw in some other abstract expressionists, whom I love too, but something in particular that I love about him. So I picked two of these, I think partially because of their totality and because of their kind of architectonic nature, which influenced my work later, which you'll see in a second. So I guess what I mean by that is, again, this kind of factual nature, this almost like cliff, no pun intended, wall, or a kind of architectural surface, something that is kind of totalizing, but then also not contained within the edge of the frame. You get the sensibility that it may continue on forever and address art or address painting as a kind of field as opposed to an event. Something that, you know, in a kind of modernist redemptive horizon, you would think about stretching on forever and influencing everything, you know, in a kind of optimistic sensibility. Although I don't think that his work feels optimistic in nature. I think there's something really weighty and heavy about it as well. So you'll see a bit of a connection. So this is one of my works from most recent exhibition. Somebody please yell at me if it's getting close to my time. So this kind of frontality is something that interests me too, and also the idea of a kind of redaction, like something done and then something covering that up as both a positive and negative gesture at the same time, like a canceling and an introduction of something new at the same time. The way that I work in these, is I work in silkscreen on top of large-scale canvas. I'm working in acrylic in the base layers and then oil paint with silkscreen, which is not something that's generally done, on top, and I'm working wet into wet. So what happens is there's a fair amount of that sort of building exhaustion in my work as well that I see in Still's work, but I'm putting material down and taking it off at the same time because the paint is wet. So one thing that I would say that differentiates my work, and I'm going to go fast so that I don't talk for too long. Here's a detail that differentiates my work in a from Still's sort of project of absolutism, right? So he was against literature in a way, so against the idea of there being a literary concept that was more important than the factuality of the object itself, right? I want to, in my work, arrive at a certain similar element of an undeniable object, although the aggregate parts that make up the paintings come from things in the world. They come from architecture, they come from my own photographs of architecture, they come from relief prints that I make from woodcuts that I do myself. So they are pointing to an elsewhere that Still would probably not be a fan of. But that's not the primary focus. I still want you to be contained and captivated within the work itself and not think about whatever the visual or the referential subject matter as being more important than the object itself. I want you to get lost in that. All right, speeding up. I know I'm going too long. Okay, that gives you an idea of scale, and then here in the residency. So what it opened up for me, this is in the studio space, didn't have time to take pictures of individual things, but it kind of blew open a more direct hand to paper. One of the most exciting things I found about my time here was being in the Works on Paper archives, which was just kind of a revelation, you know. Even though I don't get to see Stills paintings very often, so seeing a lot of them was a revelation too. But being in a space where what it felt like to me was direct brain to paper. With him, it's like you're sitting with him. And so that caused me to sort of forego some of my typical layering, my typical way of working, and working in a much more sort of direct way. Here's a couple of things there. And then I'm going to end with one drawing that kind of blew my mind, because first of all, because it's from 1949, and this kind of minimal gesture from that period is crazy to me and absolutely beautiful and really, really brave. But then also I wanted to include my own picture of it on the right to just give you all an idea of sort of what it's like to be in that close of proximity to something with no glass, sitting on a table that he touched. So that's what I got.
Thank you so much, Kevin. From there, we're going to go to Sarah Fox, who makes paintings that embraced unabashed sensuality, autonomy, and pleasure. Fox earned her BA and BFA from Brown University and Rhode Island School of Design, and an MFA from Yale. She's exhibited not only in the art capitals of LA and New York, but in Shanghai, Brussels, London, and Stockholm, amongst others. The Institute is one of the many kind of residencies and grants and prizes Fox has received, including a Pollock Krasner Foundation grant, residency at Yaddo, and she also won the Yale School of Art's Gloucester Painting Prize. Her work's been featured in Surface Magazine, Wall Street Journal, Modern Painters, Hyperallergic, many, 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 many things. So, thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. All right. So I'm going to show you some of my paintings and then also get in a tiny bit to what I've done while I'm here. But I wanted to kind of situate you in a brief overview of my painting practice. And this is a painting called XO. It's 80 by 70 inches. So that's like 6.5 feet tall or something like that. They're quite large. I paint gesturally, and my work is usually categorized as between abstraction and figuration, which is kind of a shorthand for saying it looks a little imagey. It also feels quite abstract. I like to think of making paintings as I want to give a generous viewing experience where you're rewarded for looking for a longer time. So they might appear quite abstract at first, and then the more you look, you might start to situate yourself with body parts and start to decode a moment of touch or something else that's happening within the painting. And people interpret my work in different ways, and I'm quite open to that. And fundamentally, I don't really think of this binary as these two binary poles. I really think of my paintings as being about abstract feelings. And I think a lot about love, desire, pleasure, and pain. And so in this painting, I was thinking about a kind of coziness and touching, and so I called it XO, but then it also sort of literally has an X and like an O kind of within it, embedded in the composition. And here's another recent painting. This one's called Dream Pop. It's a bit larger. It's about 8 feet wide, painted on 2 canvases, so it's a diptych. And within fields of paint, you can start to see things popping out. There's little feet and a little eyeball and different things that start to maybe hover on the edge of reality. And I like to paint bodies that are really slippery, where they're kind of sliding out of their own boundaries and constraints. This is another diptych called Solitary Hunter. So when I'm painting, I often ask myself, how can you paint a body so that it feels like it actually is somewhere between a leading character and just like a mess of nerve endings. So I'm like, okay, you're both a person and you're a bag of meat. So how can we hold these two things together? And that's a central question to my work. How do you kind of embody that within the paintings? And I feel like color is uniquely equipped for holding these kind of conflicting feelings. And within this painting, basically when I was choosing the colors, my idea was I wanted it to feel like sort of glittering candy and bits of glitter that were in the bottom of a trash can, like in that kind of trash water. So that's how I got to those colors. All right, this one is called Bright Lights and Black Spots. And my paintings, you know, my main ideas that I'm engaging with, I think a lot about physical intimacy, emotional intimacy, sex and gender, autonomy and submission, and everything gets played out on the canvas, and as Joyce and I have been talking about a lot, gets sublimated into the paint. So that's a big part of the process. And my marks are very fast and sloppy, they're largely improvised, and they're always a little bit out of my own control, which is how I feel within my own body. Our bodies are kind of in flux and shifting, and they're kind of a moving target. So I like to paint in a way that feels like I don't quite have a hold of it. And in this piece, over time, this large black shape emerged, which looks more colorful on the screen over there, but is quite dark in person. And that became like an anchor for the painting. So it was almost like I found a new body partway into the painting that kind of held all the heavy emotions. This is a detail just to see some of the surface texture. Some of my marks are quite absorbent into the surface and sort of slippery. Some are very scraped and worked and passed over several times. Okay, and that brings me to still. This is my favorite painting that I've seen in the museum. Joyce pulled it out for me in the storage vault, and it's from 1978. And so since being here, I've just been like completely blown away by Still's work. I already was a fan, but I've felt it's been quite a profound experience to be with his work. And this was painted towards the end of his life. He died in 1980, so this is like 2 years before he passed. And this piece to me felt like it was a symphony that's kind of hovering in this motionless air. And there's all these parts that they almost never touch each other. They're always kind of edging towards each other, which felt like it was both so joyful, it's like yellow, it's bright, it's exciting, but also just filled with longing that these things don't ever quite coexist. They're kind of hovering near each other. So since being here, I've been kind of running back and forth between our studio space and the museum and made some small works on paper. And these are watercolor and gouache. And Kevin also was talking about how his artistic project is quite different from Still's. I feel that way too, where Still is really resistant to references outside of his work, and I'm using painting to process very physical, real-world experiences. But just looking at the amount of intensity that Still can kind of pack into one mark, that's this sort of jaggedy, one craggy shape of paint, has been extremely antagonizing to me, where it makes me go back into the studio and think, how can I pack more into each piece? How can I simplify things and just let them be? And the word that keeps coming up is directness, and kind of how can you be as clear as possible, even when you're talking about something or trying to convey something that's a quite difficult to name experience. And so the last thing I'll say is just that I've been really moved to see this singular artist's vision and to kind of see him just try and try for years and paint, and then in the very last years of his life, his work just opened up like clouds.
So on my right here is Dr. Michael Barlow, a research associate professor in the Positive Early Learning Experiences Center at the University of Denver. Dr. Barlow began his public school career as a speech-language pathologist, working with children ages pre-K to high school in Illinois, Florida, and Missouri. And then he moved to positions focusing on educational assessment and administration, and spent the last 5 years of his public school career as director of early childhood education for the Rockwood School District in St. Louis County, Missouri, We led 4 programs in the school district: tuition-based early childhood education, early childhood special education, and parents as teacher and screening. And I think you'll see aspects of that in what you'll present tonight.
Sorry, Katie, I'm gonna stand. It's the professor teacher in me, I think. So I am not an artist, and I have spent my life working on behalf of the youngest humans that we get to come in contact with. So I'm gonna shift us a little bit here. So I wanted to delve into the title of my project, which is Speaking to the Rightful Presence of Young Children with Visual Impairments and Blindness at the Clifford Still Museum. If you are familiar with the Clifford Still, you may have come to see the Young Minds exhibit, where we had children 6 months of age to 6 years old curate a show of Clifford Still's work. And I was a consultant with that project, which then got me thinking about the project that I'm going to talk to you about today. My first job here was to choose a piece of Clifford Still's work that would be an inspiration for the piece that I would fabricate. And so I chose a piece that's currently hanging in a gallery upstairs. You may have seen it. My new friend is PH914, and we've spent a good amount of time with each other this week. So I not only picked the piece, but I also went to the archives and did a lot of reading of the written pieces that they have there around the time. This was 1973. I was trying to get in the mind of Clifford Still, which is was not accomplished, I'll say that. But I did get some really good insights. I also spent time with James, who's the conservator here, and we spent a lot of time at the painting upstairs because I wanted to know. With many of Clifford Still's works, you'll see markings on the canvas, and I wanted to know if those markings if he thought they were intentional, or if they were there for another reason. I didn't want to spend my fabrication time on unintentional things, and my goal in this project was not to replicate that piece. My goal is to translate that piece into a sensory experience for a young child with a visual impairment or blindness. And so now you see the juxtaposition of where I sat for the last 3 weeks, which is we have a museum here dedicated to visual arts, and how can we make it accessible to children who may have a visual impairment or blindness. I am not an artist, but I built my own frame. I then stretched as well as I could a canvas on that frame, and then began to lay down some materials that I thought would bring a sensory experience to a young child. So I used some different cloth. I used felt. The blue line that you see there is flat-sided marbles. I also wove a light source through those marbles. And Heather, if you go to the next one. Down at the bottom, you'll see there are some bells that I sewed into some pieces there, and then the pipe cleaners, or some people now call them chenille pipettes. That's the dark red on top of the orange. So when you get close to that painting upstairs, you will see that the red paint was laid on top of the orange. So I wanted to represent that, to make that distinction there. I started with yellow feathers up at the very top, and I quickly moved to using glitter paper that had a pretty sandpapery texture to it. However, I am not a glitter fan, so I wanted to make sure the glitter wouldn't rub off if someone touched it, and it did not. So that was probably more for me than the child who you will meet here. So then I partnered with the Anchor Center for Blind Children in Denver, and I worked with a teacher there who you will see in the left upper slide. Jennifer is not only a teacher of visually impaired students, she also has a visual impairment and she has albinism. So it was interesting to have her come and interact with the piece as an adult. And then you will see my new friend Miko, who is 2 years old, who has a genetic disorder, And he is, to the best of their knowledge, of his parents' knowledge, he is completely blind. I also want to give voice to something that is very important to this family, and that is that Miko is a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation of Oklahoma and a descendant of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. So on Monday of this week, Miko came to the museum with his parents, and we began an exploration, what his mother called mapping, and that is his way of exploring the piece. The piece that I built is about 4 feet by 4 feet. So we first laid it horizontally on the floor, but it was elevated a little bit on some felt bricks, for lack of a better way of saying that, and just let Miko explore that. He was very drawn to the bells, and he went back to them several times during that exploration. And he also was quite interested in the underside of the canvas. So once his mother pointed that out to him, he went back to that underside several times. After maybe about a minute of sitting down there, his mother asked me if she could take his shoes off. And when she did, he instantly put his feet on the canvas because he begins most explorations with his feet, not his hands. And I asked her about that, and she thinks it's because his feet are very grounding for him, and it's a safe way for him to explore something new. We then decided, I asked if I could take the piece and present it vertically. So we picked it up, we moved it toward the little glass partition that is there, and it was like a whole new experience for him. He was then able, as he stood, to really pay attention to the marbles and to the black material. In many of Clyfford Still's paintings, you'll see a little wispy, some little what I call wispies, and that is where he has come to the end of his stroke with a palette knife, and whatever paint is left is kind of wisping on. So I tried to represent that with the little feathers that you see coming off of that piece. So that's it. Yep.
Thank you so much. So we now have Dr. Heather Kaplan, who's an artist, educator, and researcher who studies art making and early childhood art education. She's currently an assistant professor of art education at the University of Texas, El Paso, where the context of the U.S.-Mexico border guides her practice and understanding. She's interested in notions of play, materiality, community, contemporary art making practices, and storytelling. Her written scholarship has appeared in a number of national and international research journals and edited anthologies. Her creative work has also been shown broadly. Thanks.
Thank you. I want to piggyback off of Kevin's thank you, but I also want to extend a really big thank you to the education department here at the Still for their fellowship and their access. Paris, Nicole, Mitra, and Caitlin, I really appreciate the way that you've built and made this experience for me. And I also want to really thank the Stills community partners, Catholic Charities, Clayton Early Learning, and the Denver Public Library for welcoming me and allowing me access to their spaces as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a right turn and a little bit of the panic that I had when I entered the fellowship at the beginning and realized that I had bitten off more than I could chew. And I want to also thank all of you for tolerating and working with me to help me through that. But I also want to express that it was actually really an opportunity that I've really come to appreciate, the opportunity to rethink what I was doing. So my presentation is titled, What Are the Practices of Early Childhood Art Education Research at the Clyfford Still? Because that's really the larger question that I had to come back and reconsider, because I am an ethnographer at heart. And so when I got here, I realized I really did not know the context. So initially I had sort of proposed that I would look at the collection, I would mine it for ideas, And then I would study deeply embedded in the community's partner space, which there just wasn't enough time to do that. And then from there, I would do an intervention, which became just too large to get done in a 3-week span. So let me explain a little bit about the difference between the intervention at the bottom, the third point, and what I call ethnography. So if you're not familiar with research terms, ethnography is considered writing culture. So that's where you get the ethno and the graphy, right? And so what I do is ultimately I'm interested in understanding and describing. I'm most comfortable as a participant observer, meaning that I like to be part of a space, and I like to only enter spaces where I'm welcomed and feel like I'm not disturbing or interrupting or changing things beyond where people are comfortable. That's really important. It consists of interviewing and thick description as well as that observation. In particular, my goal with this ethnography is after my initial observations and data analysis, I would like to develop responsive research questions and protocols and practices from that. So that's a little bit more of an education approach to ethnography. So I'm going to show you a little bit about other works that I've done that are ethnographies. This is a site in a Midwestern city where my initial goal was to observe and learn more about young children. So I did this because I didn't know very much about young children and was tasked with teaching art for elementary school teachers, and I was largely just a visual arts teacher, not an elementary teacher. So I went to this site once a week in the mornings for 2 years. It was a preschool classroom, but that meant that over the 2 years I saw 3-year-olds and I saw 5-year-olds and I saw 4-year-olds. And so sometimes it would be a really young preschool class and sometimes it would be an older preschool class. The co-teachers volunteered, which was really important to me, and I didn't begin the research until I was embedded for at least a year. And then this role grew from a participant observer role to an artist, teacher, researcher, which meant eventually, after sitting in their space, they saw me as an expert and wanted me to use my expertise and participate in a more direct way than being more of an observer. So that's the kind of thing that I really appreciate. My research questions, I've included those because when I went back and looked at them, I see threads from the things that I'm asking here and the things that I'm seeing in the museum, and particularly the first question. So how do young children's play and art making blur epistemological and ontological boundaries to create or engender new ways of knowing and being? In particular, I'm thinking about the interpretation that Valerie, can't remember her last name right now, is talking about in some of the exhibition spaces upstairs, particularly with regard to action painting and Rosenberg. So I'm thinking about some of these actions and processes that children are using and how they might be educationally similar to a philosophy that Still might have used in his space, but I'm thinking about them more broadly and they're not quite gelled into research questions quite yet. The second site is a Jewish Reggio-inspired early childhood center in the Southwest. This was closer to some of my experiences, my new experiences here at the Still. I had not worked with babies. I have not worked with babies myself, so my youngest was 18 months, and so the big question kind of coming out of this space, a Reggio-inspired Hispanic serving private early education space, was really, how do I work with toddlers? I had never done so. And some of the similar questions of what are the expression, what are the spatial aesthetic choices that were made by children and adults, those kinds of things came out of this space, which had a really beautiful indoor-outdoor component to the architecture. So I leave you with my set of questions that just keeps getting bigger and bigger. But I'm super excited about this, and I really want to thank Joyce and the committee for allowing and making the space for this kind of deep questioning. I was talking to Nicole about it, and I haven't had the time to do that in a long time. Particularly, I feel it feels closer to the way that you approach a dissertation than the way that I exist in academia, where everything is a project that has an outcome, that has a set of questions that are already submitted. So this feels very messy, but it also feels very strong to me. And so some of the ones that I'm super excited about are number 4 in the middle that says juxtaposing the concurrent MCA gallery exhibition. That one that starts to ask about the way that we interpret and understand Still's work to be an object versus the ways that a lot of contemporary work has to have an intervention between the work and a text or a work and a curator, and the ways that the education staff here empowers visitors to draw their own conclusions, to think their own thoughts, and does that with the youngest members is really important to me. So those sorts of things are sort of interesting to me.
Thank you so much. And our last fellow is Emily Grace King, who's an artist and a museum professional living and working in Denver metro area. King's the exhibition manager and associate curator at the Arvada Center, and in 2016, she founded the community project Art Drop Arvada. She served her city as chair of the Arvada Arts and Culture Commission, and she's also a strong advocate in the community for public art and for civic investment in local artists at all stages of their careers. Her commitment as an artist, museum professional, and community leader has shaped the project that she pursued here at the Still.
Thank you. I'm going to stand up so I can see all your faces. So I'm Emily Grace King, and my project is all about creating accessible resources for local artists in their community, in our community, to be able to kind of continue their legacies after they die. Really fun to talk to a lot of artists about their deaths. So as a curator, I've worked with many artists on these kind of big late career retrospectives. And what I kept hearing from these artists over and over again, and going to their storage units and studios with hundreds of paintings, just really prolific bodies of work, is that none of them had plans for what was going to happen to this work. And I got really personally kind of worried that we were, as a community, going to lose their voices and their legacies because they don't have plans. And they've been really, really impactful on me and on our communities. So as part of this project for the Clyfford Still Fellowship, I conducted 18 artist interviews. I got to do many of these in the galleries here, which is a really incredible experience to sit in the center of this space with an artist talking about their work and what they want to happen to it after they die. And what I found out was that very few of these 18, only 2 of them, kind of had concrete plans for what was going to happen. And those concrete plans were not wills. They were like, I know what I want. And I heard over and over again from all of these artists that they were really concerned about their work becoming a burden for their families after their death. So I engaged with a lot of Clyfford Still resources here at the museum to help inform this work. Of course, we're sitting in like an incredible dream of Clyfford Stills right now. And so I really wanted to learn from his really innovative process and what he was thinking about when he was planning this museum, when he was getting his, kind of amassing all of his paintings, buying back works. And I really wanted to understand the really unique structure of this museum and how it was formatted, how it came to exist as it is. And I did this through engaging with the archives, but really mostly engaging with the staff. The staff has been unbelievably generous, and they are just such an enormous wealth of resources. And I was really interested in understanding this staff who is kind of forwarding this legacy and what their opinions were on the ways that Clyfford Still set it up that were like maybe really successful and really great, and maybe the ways that he set it up that might be hindering the mission that he kind of really saw. He could have never imagined like the contemporary museum scene and art and what the world would look like. And the staff was very generous and wonderful to talk to about those things. So kind of blending this mix of talking to all these artists and understanding the kind of process that this museum came to be, I came to understand that the kind of top resources that artists really need are training on the basics of catalog artwork and documentation, first of all. It became clear, learning kind of stills process and what his family continued to do after his death, that like if an artist wants their stuff to exist, this has to get done. If that step isn't getting done, then their art is just gonna kind of like dissolve into time. We just have no chance of kind of keeping it. And then every artist said, I need either more time because I want to be in the studio, I don't want to be cataloging my artwork, or I need money to be able to pay assistants, which is just buying their time. And then they all needed help with goal setting. A lot of times I'd ask questions like, what kind of are your dreams? And they wouldn't be able to kind of pinpoint exactly what, but if I said things like, do you want your work still on public view? Do you want your work in collections? Then they could kind of navigate and say, oh yeah, that's really important to me. So really this like just sitting down with them and talking through what the options are is really important. And of course, every artist has a totally different process. So these resources really need to be catered to the artist specifically and their body of work and their own community and families. It has to be accessible to artists at all levels of their career. A big part of why I was interested in this is because especially women and artists of color are lacking those resources later in life. And those are the voices we most need to continue in this conversation. And it needs to be a blend of kind of workshops that we can hand off to them to be able to like, here's some tools, go do it, and these really high touch services where they can come to someone and get really hands-on advice and practical, like, we're just gonna do it kind of services, and partnerships with other local organizations. And so thinking about this kind of big package of resources, I started to think about what if this was kind of more of like all these resources that a museum or an art institution could disseminate into their own communities. And so instead of kind of one thing happening here in Denver, it's something that all these institutions across the country can be helping and supporting their own artists and their own communities. Both great for artists and strengthening that bond between art community and the museums and institutions in their cities. So I have a background in graphic design, so this is just kind of some of how I process through ideas. So I kind of made a little mock-up of like, how would I market this to artists? And then one of, how would I market this to like museums and institutions who are interested in offering these services? Which, as you can see, led to all kinds of other thoughts around the edges of, like expanding what those things would look like. And so now I'm figuring out and working with the museum to figure out what this will look like to prototype and to kind of pilot and to start looking at what this curriculum would look like and what all these resources would look like for artists in our community and beyond. Thank you.
So, I promised a moderated conversation, but mindful of the time, I do want to kind of like ask one little question and to also give an opportunity for the public to ask questions. I really thought that each of you did a really wonderful job, really kind of addressing the ways in which you drew from still, but also the ways in which the directions that each of you took were so distinct, and in terms of the projects that you began or finished or the questions that you posed, I really love the huge range of your approaches. I guess one question that I would ask each of you is, what do you think, what kind of practice or orientation or question or something from your time here do you think you're gonna bring into your everyday after you leave Denver?
So I was saying this, we had some studio visits earlier, and my tendency in my work is to go straight in for the big things, the finished works, the important stuff. And I lose track of that time of what I was describing with still as this kind of brain on paper, just event. So I think it brought a looseness into the way that I was thinking and the way that I was working, something that I could leave aside and interpret later, as opposed to have an idea of why I'm doing it now. I don't know, I don't care, I'm doing it, and then I'll go and analyze it after the fact. And then hoping that some of that kind of physical looseness that I found enters into the paintings as well. So I would say those are the kind of the things for me.
I can jump on. I feel like there's so much determination in both the way that Still paints, and then he was so determined to have this come into fruition. And I've been feeling like this is like a moment of returning to the romance of painting for me, where I can get caught up in the art world in New York. I live in New York. I can get caught up in all kinds of outside pressures, and this kind of like singular vision and determination, it felt like it was giving me that faith back into my work. So I hope I can maintain that and bring it back with me.
I'll second that one.
I think the thing that kind of I'm going to keep is maybe more outside of my project, but just the transparency and generosity of this museum and staff was really inspiring to me. I think that I can, or like there can be a general like secrecy or preciousness about things, or like you're not really sure what to share, like what's special information, and this just seemed like it's all for you. Like all of it is available, and all of our time and all of our resources are just open to you. And that level of transparency just really opened up, I think, a lot of our projects to have access to that. And I felt very inspired by that, to be like, yeah, we don't need secrets. Let's be transparent.
I think I work and live in the Southwest. So I live in Las Cruces, and I work in El Paso. And up until last year, I was what I would call the only academic art educator in probably 4-hour range. So I'm hoping to take these relationships and build them. And I'm also really interested in babies now. Yeah. Which I've never really had an opportunity to be guided by all of your approaches, and that's a really nice way to wade into it.
Well, first I'm going to stay here because I live here.
Yes.
I'm going to continue to be a fierce advocate for young children with a wide variety of attributes to be in spaces where young children should be. And that's what I've done, and that's what I will continue to do. I think this only just fortifies that for me.
Great.
I'm going to just kind of take my opportunity to thank each of you for engaging so deeply with all of us, not only kind of looking closely with us, sharing your perspectives. It was such a joy for the entire staff, I know, to kind of be in this kind of space of questioning and wonder and a kind of openness that I think we drew from all of you. So, with that, I want to open up that wasn't much moderating, but if you want to get your questions in, we gotta pivot now. Hope we can keep moderating. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm fascinated by every residency and the work that you've done. So thank you for taking your time to not only do that work, but share it with all of us. The one question I have, coming from an early childhood background, is in particular the kind of template or pilot that you created, Michael, with your work of art, your fabrication. Have you given thought to how you can take that and out to other museums and to schools and other places? I am totally, captivated by that idea as someone who believes that young children, every young child deserves the kind of experiences that this will give. And I don't think it's limited to children in a special group, who have a special need. I think that same experience could be monumental in contributing to a child's connection to visual arts and just additive. So have you given thought to how you might take it to another level? I know that's a lot, sorry.
I'm so glad you asked.
And you can just, let me know later.
The piece, which is in the back, I can bring it out when we're done, will go to the Anchor Center for Blind Children and be on display there for continual exploration by children and staff there. It'll be there for a little while. I am just starting to think about what you're talking about, but I also just wanted to say real quickly, a follow-up that I got from Miko's parents said this: please accept my sincere gratitude for the time you took out of your busy schedule. Oh, that was me, sorry. Here we go. When we found out Miko was blind, it felt like this dark cloud now loomed over the life I had hoped for him. But he is so incredible and is thriving in a world that hasn't always considered him when it comes to things like museums. And because people like you are thinking about how to make things like art accessible to those with visual impairments, Miko will feel supported and free to explore in public spaces. And I think that, that's very motivating for me to think about how I move forward. I don't know if other museums have tackled such a thing. I need to start to think about that and then engage other thought partners and scholars about this work.
I'm going to take one more question from the crowd.
Make it a good one.
Thank you, Joyce. This is a wonderful event that you put on here, and it extends the legacy of the Still Museum, which has been, 13, 14 years, something like that. My question is based on my personal experience as an artist, watching the Still come together as a building, as a collection, and as the piece itself, or the finished product. And I had my own experience with the Still, similar to the 9-year-old self. I was much older. But the thing that comes to me all the time is megalomania. And I'm just wondering what Still's megalomania, the effect on each of you might have had.
I think I was with Bridget today, and we were driving, and we were talking about Still, and in a positive way, as we do. And then the word, I just was driving, and I said, the hubris. It's like, how dare he? But it's kind of amazing, the belief, that self-belief that he had in his work. So I look at it two ways. In one way, all the artists that I know that I speak with are so riddled with doubt, and that's how they move through their processes, and that's how they grow. And I'm sure that's there in his work too, which brings up another thing. I would love to see something compiled and more concise, pulled eventually from the writings, to really to delve into that. But so on the one hand, this feeling of that kind of megalomania, of hubris, but then also I go back to what Sarah was saying too, and this kind of sense of absolute belief in the project, as being essential, and removing oneself from the commerce of it all, from the argumentative nature of being in competition with all the artists around you all the time, and saying, I need to be able to focus in such a way that I can release myself from all of those external factors is kind of amazing. But then to turn that into, I'm going to make a museum about myself. That's so he had some ego on him,
I want to take that seriously because, I think we're all, it's an unavoidable question. But I think if we come at it from a slightly different perspective, what drives a person to hold on to 93% of everything that they ever made? And not only that, to make replicas of works that have left his hands, That, to me, is not the mark of a megalomaniac. That is the mark of, frankly, an overprotective parent, right? An overprotective parent who, doesn't see a world prepared to embrace this enterprise and this project in a way that he felt that art, writ large, should be, that art should be shown so that we can make sense of each artist's project. It's not just that he felt like his art was the only art that should have the privilege of a single gallery. You know, I think those are conditions that he wanted for art, period, you know. And for that to be achieved, I think, you know, yes, sacrifices were made, not just by him, it was made by his family, you know, and also sacrifices that, you know, huge risks were taken. One of the risks taken was that this body of work would never see the light of day at all, right? And it actually took the work of, you know, just because you will something doesn't mean that it's going to happen, you know? It really took the commitment of his widow to really kind of follow through on this idea. But more importantly, it took the commitment of this city to go after this collection, not once, but twice, you know? It took this city to really kind of build a platform to really kind of find a home for these children, you know? And I think what's at stake for me in, you know, kind of testing out the idea of an institute is really to kind of take seriously the fact that Still didn't declare that he wanted to have a museum built to him. He wanted to entrust this collection to an American city. And so I think that suggests that this is an artist who really understood that artworks themselves have a true civic potential. And for me, that kind of civic potential is not, you know, the work is strong enough to sustain so many different perspectives, critical, engaging, questioning, and otherwise. And I think there is going to be this wonderful legacy that he leaves us, but let's also remember it's not just him. It's his widow, it's all of those who invested in this building, it's all of those who invested in this enterprise. And it's also all of those who come and engage with us in our programs, in our thinking, in our making, in our creativity. I think that's what we ultimately get out of a man's single-mindedness, you know? So.
Joyce, after spending hours reading in the archives and also on the online archives, he was a colorful linguist, I'll say that.
Very colorful.
And your notion of an overprotective parent may have applied to his artwork, but I'm not sure it applied to his own children. So, you know, there's a lot to think about. He's
Absolutely.
a very complex human.
Absolutely. And,
Yep.
you know, again, I think the writings, I think the writings are really important because there is no individual who is free of flaw. And there is no parent free of flaw. But what we hold in our care is the kind of multiple, unpredictable kind of potential that each of these works, each sheet of paper, you know, and also the kind of expertise and experience that this staff brings to bear by, you know, like I think there's a kind of openness that we inherit that I think is exciting. So, well, I wanted to kind of share this amazing cohort of the, Institute Fellows with you all. I really want you all to kind of keep your eyes peeled. We're gonna, be mounting this again, and we really look forward to opening and expanding this community even more broadly. So, thank you so much.